One day away, folks, and it feels good talking college football, even though talking season's almost done. But while it still is talking season, might as well take advantage with one of the very best. We got Josh Pate on the line from Late Kick 247 Sports. Josh, how we doing today?
I'm good, man. You said the optimum word. The optimum word is Friday. And from now until the end of the season, Friday is travel day. So right now, Friday is let's do some YouTube in the morning and then go disappear somewhere in Tennessee for the rest of the afternoon day. So I'm in a good place right now, Mark. How are you doing?
Doing well. Can't wait for some college football tomorrow. And then, of course, everybody dives in a week from now. Josh, before we get started on 2021, for you, what is it about college football? What is it about this sport that is just a little bit more captivating, a little bit more rabid on the American sports scene than any other? And would love to know how you got into the sport.
Well, let me go in reverse. I got into it from growing up and going through my dad's old VHS tape library of games at Legion Field in Birmingham back in the 60s and 70s, where it would be Bryant and Alabama versus, who knows, it was Southern Cal and Nebraska, a lot of big time games. And I used to watch that. And it used to feel like a different world because I hadn't even been born yet. So that's a different world for me. But I always used to watch that, and I would look in such a mythological way at people like Paul Bryant or people like Woody Hayes or Bo Schembechler. And so when I started growing up a little bit, I was working down in Columbus, Georgia at a fabric warehouse. I wasn't in any kind of media, didn't have any kind of the right degree or anything like that. But I listened to talk radio nonstop, and I had a passion for college football. I mean, always have. So that's kind of a DNA thing. But I would listen, and at the time, podcasting, YouTube Live or anything like this had not become in vogue at all. So you had to search the national airwaves, and you know the deal. In the morning and early afternoon, you got to search the national airwaves. Then your local afternoon drive will come on, and you can get some college football there. But I thought to myself, like, where is it? Because I know I go to these stadiums, there are 100,000 people there. There's a huge market for this. Where is the national serving to that market? And so, man, I used to think back in the day, boy, I hope I can do this one day at a national level. I don't know how, Mark. I had no schematic, believe me, but I hope I can do it. And so, I think technology has blessed us with the ability to do this. But what I love, man, is the NFL game is great. The Sunday product is great, but there is no interconnectivity on any other landscape of American sport that exists that even comes close, remotely close to portraying what it's like between a college fan base and its program. I've never seen anything like that. I don't think you get anything else like that on the American sports landscape. It's why I get rubbed the wrong way so much when people try and professionalize our sport, when people try and look and say, well, they do it this way in the NFL, why don't we? And you just go, shh, watch the Sunday product. If you like the way they do it there, watch the Sunday product. Leave this one alone. Let us live in our little snow globe over here. Leave this one alone. So I could go all day on just that question alone. That's the most loaded question you'll ever ask anyone, is the question you just asked me.
Josh Pate on the line from Late Kick 247 Sports. If you're not aware, please get aware. Just search it in the topic bar, but I'm sure most of you are. 2021, before we get down to the actual games, they kick off in week one, the big topics on the landscape. And I can't remember an off season in which we had this many earth-shattering type events like NIL, like transfer portal, like, of course, the 12-team college football playoff proposal, the SEC expansion, and then bam, more with this alliance. So we'll stop right there. The ACC, the Big Ten, the Pac-12 make an announcement a few days ago. It's really nothing at this point, but do you think it's going to make an impact at some point?
Not really. I think the one impact, well, you know what, let me back up. I don't want to just dismiss that, because the one impact, which would be totality in impact, would be if they somehow could reframe the future of that playoff TV deal, which I think is in the cards and I think that's in their scope, then that would be big. If they could do nothing more than reworking the way that that entire system operates to where that proposal can go to the open market, that's a very big deal. I am not a huge fan of watching any one media entity have a disproportionate grip over this sport. The one place, now I will see this, the one place that I do think our brethren in the NFL get it right is look at the NFL playoff structure and look at how many different networks are involved there. And I'm not so sure that's not the better way to go. That may be one area where they got it figured out better. Now they have centralized authority in the NFL, whereas we have splintered authority in the college game. And, sometimes that's a good thing. In this particular case, probably not such a good thing. But the scheduling dynamic, I'm not a big believer that 5 years from now, if you and I were to talk, that if either one of us mentions the alliance, the other would even know what we were talking about. I think that's probably how quickly that'll go by the wayside.
And that might be a good thing. Josh Pate's on the line. Please like the video, share these videos out on social media if you enjoy the content. Others will as well, and subscribe, of course, and head on over to Late Kick as well. So you're running right in line with my thinking at this point in regards to a central body to govern the sport, because nobody can blame, regardless of your allegiance, can really blame the moves that have been made by Texas and Oklahoma, and to make the partnership the SEC. It makes total sense from every possible standpoint in terms of the competitive nature on the field and owning the sport, to the finances, of course. But is it good for college football, what we've just seen over the last month?
No, I don't think it is. In fact, a lot of the things you just brought up, I don't think are great for the sport. Now, there may have been some inevitability with some of those things. They're coming whether you like them or not. But some of this stuff's avoidable, Mark. Some of this stuff is as easy as someone standing up in the room and saying, I don't know if we're going to do this. I don't know. I know that theoretically I can buy all those small restaurants in this town and I can just own the entire food scene. I don't know if I'm going to. So I don't necessarily know if that's what's best for Nashville, Tennessee. Now, I myself am not in a position to do that, but I think the example still stands. But we don't have that right now. We got a lot of nervousness. There's a lot of trepidation because it is hard to see around the corner. In our world, I'm fortunate enough to be able to sit in on some of these meetings with the folks at CBS, for example, and I listen to some of this language. But more importantly, let me whisper a little bit because some of them are in the office. I also listen to the folks who are involved in some of these decisions. They don't know. They don't know where things are going. They got a lot of guesses. And it's the same way in the league offices. They don't know. The misconception in all this, Mark, is there is a feeling from your general college football fan that there's a grand master plan that Greg Sankey is following, or that Bob Bowlesby is, the victim of, but that a lot of these other conference commissioners are following. It's not. They don't know what's around the corner any more than anyone else. You can't, because the impetus for all this is the TV landscape 5 years from now, and no one knows what that's going to look like. Because if we were to have rewound 5 years ago from this point, you wouldn't have known that the media landscape looks like it is today. What they're just trying to do is best position themselves, and a lot of them are terrified because a lot of them are worried that one false move can jettison them into permanent irrelevance. And so on one hand, I get it. On the other hand, I just wish there was a lot more communication. Just because they're talking doesn't mean they're communicating. I don't doubt that they were talking. There's a little communication. Everyone was talking allegedly this time last year. And then all of a sudden we had random conferences cancel their season, then uncancel the season. So talking and communication are two different things. I think the communication has been pretty poor in this sport, and the centralized focus has been non-existent.
So when it comes to the 12-team playoff, are you an expansion guy? And is the 12-team format that's been proposed the way you would go?
No, I've never been for expansion. If I have to go expansion, I was never crazy about expanding that field, period, but much less to the 12-team format. I've had people sell me on the 6 or 8-team concept, well, theoretically, but not the 12. But the reason for that is not because I don't think it would be a great product. I think the playoff itself would be phenomenal to watch. We go back to what I told you about in your first question about the way I grew up and the way I was taught about the game. And the way I was taught about college football was what's unique about this thing is October 13th or September 28th, November 1st. Those are in and of themselves to be cherished. Those regular season weekends are to be cherished, and the value placed on them is to be maximized. And I was taught that, yes, this is in a bygone era, but yes, there is a champion crowned at the end of the year, but it's really, it's the cherry on top of that regular season. It's kind of the sauce on top of this steak. And somewhere along the way, and this is my opinion, I know a lot of people disagree with this, but somewhere along the way, that whole thing got inverted, and the regular season for college football started to be modeled as a build-up towards the whole hashtag who's in philosophy of, all right, here's our crescendo at the end of the year. And that makes sense because you got a lot of people coming from the pro sports world where every one of them are formatted like that. So it makes sense to make college that way. But if you're looking from the inside out, if you don't come from that world and you are of this world like I am and like some other people are, you say it doesn't have to be like that. We've got a really good thing going over here. And if it doesn't appeal to someone, it doesn't appeal to someone. But I grew up a big NASCAR fan, and I don't watch it anymore. And the reason is because NASCAR, I think, made this critical mistake. NASCAR, I think, totally abandoned what in radio you would call your P1 audience, which are the diehards. They're the Darlington Speedway crowd. And when you start dumping a race at Darlington to put one in Kansas or Chicago, because a marketing firm told you, oh, this is going to grow your sport. No, what it does is it puts your sport in front of some folks and they look at it and they say, no, I'm going to go hang out at Navy Pier today. And then you try and go back home and they don't show up for you either. One of the biggest mistakes that you ever make is taking your P1 core audience for granted. And if you do that, you do it possibly at your own peril down the road.
At the same time, do you think we're doing an injustice to certain leagues and teams across the country that aren't maybe evaluated the same way? So take the Pac-12, for example. I think we would both agree that the Pac-12 at the top has not rated with the other conferences, especially the SEC, of course, and the Big Ten in recent years. But basically, and people just assume, hey, if we would have allowed the Pac-12 in the playoff the last few years, they would have been annihilated. But we just don't have much evidence. We don't have data, metric points, because of the lack of non-conference games to truly know that. Wouldn't it be great to have representation from all the conferences?
Well, I would love to rework the way regular season scheduling operates. I'd love to get you your data points from reworking the way the regular season schedule operates. But look, I hear the cries for the G5 not being included. I hear the cries for a conference being disproportionately excluded, but I don't look at it as if they are being excluded. I look at it as them excluding themselves from the opportunity, because I can go back. I mean, if you and I went back, so let's say we had a 20-year-old watching this thing right now who would have been in diapers in the early 2000s, and you told them about Southern Cal running the world, and you told them about Pete Carroll and USC being the Alabama of that era, they would look at that and they would say, oh, that's not possible now, because they've had it ingrained in them that that Pac-12 helmet sticker means you can't accomplish big things in this sport. I'm not a believer that the playoff is to blame for a conference's undoing. I'm a big believer that horrible decision-making at the top down and several poor hires at the top down individually in the athletic departments and a horribly mismanaged TV deal, none of which is attached to the playoff apparatus, is a lot more to blame. And so the question for me becomes, how do you fix it? Like, do we take poor decision-making and do we fix it by expanding the playoff? Or do we look in the mirror and blame ourselves instead of looking out the window and blaming the system? And do we start to fix things from within? Because to me, you can expand your playoff all you want to. It's not going to improve the product on the West Coast. If you improve internally, that improves the product on the West Coast. You can't tell me it's not possible. I've already seen it done. And I'm not a big believer in the excuse that the landscape has now shifted to where they can't do it. Mark, here's how bad it is. You have the advantage of all these quarterbacks being in your backyard. They're actively having to choose to go 3,500 miles away to Clemson, South Carolina, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or Athens, Georgia to play. If anyone is of the opinion that kids in Southern California all of a sudden just grew up and decided, I want to go live in South Carolina or Alabama as opposed to SoCal, that's you're kidding yourself. They got to have a reason to stay home. They haven't been given the reason. The playoff committee has not been given a reason to put a bunch of Pac-12 teams in.
And there seems to be a bit of a glimmer of hope based on the selection of a commissioner. Just based on what comes out of his mouth, he seems to be a little bit more forward thinking in the 21st century. And so there may be some hope because, yeah, I grew up in an era a little bit earlier than yours, somewhere between you and your dad's possibly, where the Pac-12 was not an afterthought. The Pac-12 was considered, hey, this might be the best football being played in the 80s and throughout the 90s at some point.
What one of the worst things is, Mark, is to not to interrupt you there, but one of the worst things is when someone wants to walk in and overthink the room and they want to take that intellectual high ground and they say, well, look, Josh, I mean, what you don't understand, being from the South where you can barely put two syllables together, is in the West, they have beaches. They have things to do outside. as if those things didn't exist in 2003. The beaches are brand new. They just peeled the stickers off the beaches out in the West, and now all of a sudden people are going. That's why there's not a crowd at the Coliseum. It's not because the football product is substandard. It's just because there are things to do. I've never bought that stuff, and it'll all be disproven. If Southern Cal were to have hired Urban Meyer, how do you think the crowds would look at the Coliseum this year? How do you think Southern Cal would look at the Coliseum this year?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think when we talk about a central governing body being generally could be good for the sport, when we talk about the conferences having different levels of commitment to the sport, I think that was all revealed to us during the pandemic. The SEC led the way. There was commitment to football. Not that there was disregard for the student athlete or the guidelines or anything, but we're committed to football. Now let's make it work. And we're going to do all the right things to protect people to get to the finish line to play football. The ACC came along quickly. The Big 12 followed. The Pac-12 was, of course, the least committed to getting games on the field. And then the Big 10, I think this was the most revealing. There's such a gap between the academia and the elitists in the Big 10 and the working man within the Midwest that wants football. The players, coaches, the parents, they pushed for football, and you saw that divide in Big 10 country.
The most shocking aspect of that all is not that the bow tie crowd in the Big 12 didn't care about jettisoning college football. That didn't surprise me. I mean, these are the pinky out folks when they drink their tea in the morning. The shocker was that they were so detached from reality, they were surprised at the pushback. The reason that the entire approach they took was so horrific when it got revealed is because they never thought it was going to have to be revealed. They put a car out on the floor, never thinking anyone was going to ask to raise the hood. So it doesn't matter if it's damaged. They're never going to ask. These idiots will just take what we give them. And all of a sudden, some players and coaches and even some administrators and a ton of fans started to push back. And all of a sudden you find out, you got lied to about a vote. You find out procedurally, it didn't go exactly according to script. All of a sudden you're going to get sued by someone at Nebraska. We're totally ill-equipped for that. Our commissioner hasn't been seen in 12 to 14 days. That is basically an ivory tower crowd that has the gate opened and the public is allowed inside for the first time. And you see that a lot of these folks that you've held in such high regard, they're really just as big a mess as you and I. I mean, they really don't have anything together anymore than anyone else does. And so that's still there. Okay, that sort of still festers. And so when we're looking now at the whole conference expansion realignment conversation, there are two schools of thought. One is, the Big Ten will always stick together, and maybe they will. But I don't know nearly that veneer exists like it used to. I don't think they walk and talk in lockstep like they used to.
Got Josh Pate on the line from Late Kick 247 Sports, breaking down the 2021 season. And now we'll get to just that and hopefully an uninterrupted campaign for college football across the board. There's a top five in the nation. Of course, there's been, I'll say Alabama has separated itself beyond elite. Clemson, Ohio State elite, Alabama ultra elite. And then, of course, Georgia, Oklahoma to some degree, depending on your vantage point, whether Oklahoma is just elite because of the conference they play in, and then they're going to have to prove it in the playoff. And of course, Georgia, I tend to defend Kirby Smart in Georgia almost on a daily basis. Lest we forget, they do play in a conference with Alabama, and they were that close in 2017 and really that close in 2018. So is the divide that severe between those five and everybody else, or who's most vulnerable for those that criticize the sport for being too predictable? Is there some unpredictable element that might be out there finally here in 2021?
Yeah, I don't think we've had a better opportunity to see competitive balance at the top than we have this year in quite a while. And there's several factors in that. Mark, we don't even know what the average experience level, being well above and beyond what it normally is, we don't know what that's going to mean this year. It could mean crisper defensive play. It could mean that because it's balanced out offensively and defensively, there is no net benefit either way. Or it could mean that you have a little bit of a cramming effect to where the top of those redwoods gets trimmed off a little bit and they're just a little bit more reachable. And you still got teams that stand out. You still got those redwoods that stand out above the canopy, but it's not insurmountable. It's not like you go into every game saying, boy, if we can have this close at the half That'd be nice for recruiting. No, I absolutely think some of these teams are going to taste their blood early in the year. Ohio State, Alabama, there are opportunities for these teams to not even get beaten, but just show vulnerability early in the year. And I would encourage people, if they haven't, take your perception of what Alabama will be, for example. That's the national champ from last year. I thought it was the best team they've had under Saban. He would tell you the same. And now frame your expectation. I think a lot of people just expect a transition. Well, Bama's Bama. Well, no, Bama's not just Bama. You've got individuals that make up a team that wears that jersey, but each team takes on an individual identity. And I think this one is going to take a second or two to get its wheels under it. Now, eventually, they may be the best team in the nation. They may still win the national title, for all I know. But if someone expects 42-0 at halftime against Miami, or if someone expects them to go in there and just run up and down the field in Florida, and especially if someone expects them to ragdoll Texas A&M, that's not happening. And so if you expect that, I think that's your own fault. Nick Saban's been brutally honest as of late at his press availabilities in Tuscaloosa to tell you this team's got a ways to go. And I don't think he's lying to you. I think he's being pretty honest. So they're going to be a work in progress. Now, that's the kind of team a coach likes, because a coach likes to coach. So he's not deterred by it. But, yeah, I absolutely think that there's some vulnerability. We could find weaknesses in all these teams.
Within the same conference, Texas A&M, obviously, with most of its defense back, they just made the selection at Haynes King at starting quarterback. Who are you looking at? You're looking at LSU, who I think with Florida might have the biggest wild card status of any of the really good teams in America. You're looking at LSU or Texas A&M as being the team that could take their shot at Bama.
I think it would be Texas A&M if I had to pick one. LSU has got the roster to put themselves in play as well. I want to see them be healthy the whole year, first off. Secondly, I really hope their offensive line can gel to the degree it needs to, because unlike the Joe Burrow year, they do not have the transcendent element at quarterback and that scramble ability at quarterback and 15 different bailout receivers in order to make that somewhat irrelevant. But see, that offensive line, when they went into 2019 at LSU, was viewed as a question mark. They won the Joe Moore Award. So it ended up being a really good offensive line. I don't think this year's offensive line has that ceiling. Can they be good enough? They need to get average to above average offensive line play. Love the depth on the defensive line, but a lot of those guys have to stay healthy. But see, the reason I'm glad A&M doesn't play Bama in week one is because I wouldn't like their opportunity to pull the upset in week one any more than I would LSU. A&M's got to get their receiver room back. There are a lot of guys that should make that the best receiver room Jimbo's have. They can't do it on the sideline. And so they've gone through a majority of fall camp having to work without guys that they are counting on to be integral parts of their offense. Their tight ends hopefully will be healthy this year. They believe in Haynes King. For that matter, they believe in Calzada. Like, they think they can win with either one of those quarterbacks. The whole offensive line being the question mark there, I think is actually going to shift. I think there's going to be a lot of LSU 2019 to this A&M offensive line. They're questioned because they lack experience. I talked to someone at A&M last week who said, we think this offensive line's got higher upside than the one we had last year, which sounds ludicrous because it was one of the best ones we've seen. But they love the talent. It's just a lot of young talent. I think the focus will shift to that wide receiver core. If they're not able to stretch the field, that's the reason I think that'll be because of they have thrown it deep as often in fall camp as they ever have under Jimbo. It is a priority, even with a new quarterback, new offensive line. It's a priority. They know they got to do it to beat Bama. They know they got the kind of defense to bail them out if it does lead to a higher risk-reward scenario. It's the best team he's had, he being Jimbo Fisher. Yes, I think they've got a shot.
Josh Pate's on the line with us right here, the voice of college football. Appreciate the super chats coming in from King Vegeta, Mr. TW. I will read those off a little bit later. Thank you so much for those contributions. Catch Josh's show, of course, Late Kick. I'm sure most of you, if not all, are aware. Is there more of to be left for interpretation of a football season than what we saw out of Florida last year? On the positive side, they finally beat Georgia. They win the East. They give Alabama arguably the most competitive game of the season that the Tide faced. On the downside, you had the Mizzou incident at midfield concerning Dan Mullen, the complaints about the crowd at Texas A&M affecting the game, of course, the complete debacle against LSU, and then even more so in the Cotton Bowl against Oklahoma. Start with Florida and then look across the conference in the SEC in regards to how you feel about trajectories of programs that may not necessarily manifest itself this season, but who do you feel good in one direction and who may be slipping on the other side?
It is a man maker year for Florida. It's a man maker year for Dan Mullen because they do not expect you to recede once you've arrived. And the funny dynamic, like you just kind of alluded to with Florida, is if we were sitting here last year, Florida hasn't won the East to that point. They haven't beaten Georgia under Dan Mullen. And so if I were to tell you, well, not only is Florida going to beat Georgia, they're going to win the East, they're going to send a Heisman finalist to New York virtually, but yet you're still going to view the season as somewhat of a disappointment. No one would have had any way to figure out how that's even possible. How do you check all those boxes and still end up on a sour note? Well, that's how college football works. That's why you should never laugh at even the craziest predictions, because any prediction that ends up being right in August or in December would sound crazy in August. So they still, I think, are in a prove it mentality. I think the fan base still wants Dan Mullen to prove it, which brings me to the whole trajectory question. I don't know what the trajectory is there. I mean, recruiting hasn't seen a massive shift. I don't think the roster has seen a massive shift. Defensively, I don't think you see a massive. I think offensively, they got to go about things a little bit different this year. Anthony Richardson, if he gets on the field for them at quarterback, if he gets a shot, if he gets a couple series in a game, has the ability to totally light the narrative on fire. I hate using the word narrative, but he has the ability to do it because he is a tank. And physically, he is elite. He is very much behind the eight ball from a processing standpoint and mentally grasping everything. He's not there yet, but we'll see how that works. Missouri is the most fascinating team to me. Missouri is like they're halfway to Russia as it relates to the SEC, and so they get to reap the benefits of being in the SEC, but they're up out there and they're like out of the spotlight, and no one ever really knows. Sometimes you find yourself in a conversation and you say, "Oh, it's quiet around here. Where's Missouri at?" That's kind of the way it feels in the SEC. But they've got a really, really underrated coach. They've got a ton of experience back this year. And people forget this. For all the excuse making about Penn State last year and how you can't hold it against them COVID year, and Michigan can't hold it against them COVID year. Well, and Florida State can't hold it against them COVID year. First year staff. Well, Missouri had a first year staff. And they played nothing but SEC games. And they went 500. They went 5-5. And so they didn't have spring last year either. Drinkwitz didn't have a grasp of his roster either. He didn't get to recruit a class either. They went 5-5. Hugely underrated aspect of the SEC East this year. I think Missouri is going to finish much higher than people expect them to. I've got them finishing third. It would not be the biggest shock in the world if they end up surprising people and finishing second. And you got Georgia well ahead of everyone. And then this hodgepodge of 8-4, 7-5, 6-6.
Josh has his picks available right there on 247 Sports Late Kick. They're available right there. I'll have my weekly picks along with some other media members on Patreon, so join us there. Josh, you brought up Michigan. Okay. Basically, 6 games is what they've underachieved. If you take out the 6 games from last year, and again, I'm not discounting the COVID year like many do, as you just mentioned, but Jim Harbaugh has basically placed this program in the top 15 in America generally for his first 5 to 6 seasons. They have the 6 games, 2-4. But other than that, I just feel as though there is so much negativity surrounding this program, maybe from a perception standpoint. I don't know if it's actually surrounding or inherent in the program currently, but from a national perception basis, that Michigan football is just fallen off the rails. And I don't know how much of that's true. Where do you stand on Michigan?
No, I don't think it's fallen off the rails at all. I think they suffer from a little bit of what Gus Malzahn suffered from at Auburn. You know, there was a stretch there up until the very end. There was a stretch where Malzahn was rattling off a resume that was very much on par with Pat Dye, who, if you're unfamiliar, if you're watching, they named the field after down there. So that's how big a deal they thought Pat Dye was. And they wanted to run Malzahn out of town. Well, what was the difference? The difference was Nick Saban residing in Tuscaloosa. And so right now you've got Ohio State, which is the 500-pound elephant in the Big Ten's room. And you know good and well, you got to get compared to them. If you're Michigan, it hasn't been bad. That's the hardest part of this. That's kind of the no man's land. If you're a Michigan fan, you find yourself in. It's easy to hit the dump button when your coach is averaging 6 wins a year. But if you're floating in that 8-win, 9-win range, and then we start extrapolating over history, and whether it makes you comfortable or not, someone can tell you that that kind of is Michigan football now. That range, aside from some spikes, that is where Michigan football has resided. So why are we discrediting this man for performing as history tells us the program should perform? Well, here's the counter. The counter is, if I'm a diehard Michigan fan, I say, you're going to have to tell me why we can't accomplish more. You can tell me about history all you want to. You're going to have to tell me why we can't accomplish more. Because I'm looking at Ohio State, and you guys want to sell me as that being our biggest rival, and they're accomplishing what they're accomplishing. If you can show me tangibly the limitations and the governors that are on our program that throttle us down and make us incapable of competing, okay, I'll accept this level. But if you can't show them to me, I'm going to be aggravated when we get blown out. I'm going to be aggravated when we can't do anything more than 8 or 9 wins. But he has. And I'm a believer, that overtime game against Ohio State, I remember I was at, where was it? I was at the Iron Bowl, I think. I was in the press box watching that on a laptop. The game has started that I'm at, and I'm watching that, and I think, oh, I don't think he got that first down. Oh, they said he got the first down. Touchdown Ohio State. That may have changed the entire trajectory of that thing. You have no clue what kind of domino effect that could have had in recruiting. There's no telling perceptionally what kind of doors that would have opened. It hasn't been the same since then. That's how important one football game, one regular season college football game can be.
Josh, I'm glad you brought it up. We talk about it here all the time, and I'm not making excuses for the program or for Jim Harbaugh, but do understand that it came down to an official's measurement. And I'm not saying it was incorrectly measured. I'm just saying when it's that close, they win the Big Ten East. They most likely defeat Wisconsin, get to the college football playoff, and who knows from there. Josh, on an annual basis, there are particular programs that intrigue me year to year. I'll point one out. UCLA. Like, why can't they win? Why can't they win more? They have football players all over the place. California's come down to a certain extent in recruiting, but still one of the top 3 states, 3 to 4 in the nation. Why can't UCLA win? When Mac Brown got it just on the cusp of winning that 7-6 season, I was like, oh, I'm fascinated with North Carolina to see what they can do now. Tennessee, my goodness, it's a dumpster fire from so many different perspectives, but they still have 100,000 people show up in the Rabbit fan base and the history and the tradition. So what programs in general intrigue you, or what particular teams here in 21 intrigue you?
TCU intrigues me a lot. Not only do I think they have an underrated team, I mean, offensive line was a huge Achilles heel for them that last year. I think they are massively improved across the offensive line. I don't have much of a doubt about the receiving core they have there. I don't doubt Duggan at quarterback. I don't doubt a lot of those elements. And so I think they'll be good. But also, if you're just on the fence about them, the scheduling dynamic is pretty incredible for them. They play Texas the week before Red River. They play Oklahoma the week after Red River. And so they catch both of the biggest teams that they have to play on their schedule either before or after their own biggest rivalry game. They also play Iowa State at the end of the year. And Iowa State, I want to say, is coming off the Oklahoma game. So they've got a situation where all their biggest games, they enjoy a scheduling dynamic advantage in. There's another one, which is obvious. I think it's the one you just pointed out. North Carolina, they have such an opportunity this year because everybody expects a nice year from North Carolina. No one has a problem ranking them in their top 15, but no one's talking about them winning the ACC. No one takes them that seriously. Imagine a world in which North Carolina won the ACC. Imagine a world where we watch Clemson in week 1 against Georgia, and they're more vulnerable than we expected them to be. And they go through the rest of the year, but instead of blowing teams out 52-14, it's 31-23. Yeah, they're cruising along, but they don't look invincible. And North Carolina starts building momentum, and they go into the ACC title game with all this recruiting momentum they have, and believe me, it's real, and all this program momentum. If North Carolina were to get over a hump that people don't think they can get over, you would be welcoming a new college football program to legitimately to the big boy table. And I would love it because it would fly in the face of these talking points that the college football system blocks programs out. Goes back to the theme you and I were just talking about. I believe horrible decision-making blocks you out. But there are others who would say, no, even if we make great decisions, this system's just rigged against us. We can't get to the mountaintop. Well, if North Carolina does it, then there are about half a dozen other programs out there that have underachieved. I'm thinking about Knoxville. I'm thinking about Austin, Texas. There are several other programs out there that have underachieved that don't get to use the system being rigged against them excuse. Because there's certainly nothing North Carolina football is accomplishing that you're not more than capable of accomplishing.
We experienced it almost year to year during the BCS era, of course, Josh, where we would get slapped upside the head with a shocker of a conference championship game somewhere that would upset everything. 1998 being the ultimate classic example of that. I just think that we've got to be, I hope that we're overdue, whether that's Iowa State against Oklahoma, whether that's a Wisconsin or Iowa jumps up against an Ohio State. They don't have to be the better team for the entirety of the season. Just on that given day, North Carolina, Clemson, as you just mentioned, I would love to see one or two of those come out this year. And then the ultimate wild card, and it's a beautiful thing that Indiana and Notre Dame are on the schedule, but Cincinnati, wouldn't that be something if they could run the table?
I've been arguing with people at CBS about this a lot. There is a cabal here, for lack of a better term. I think this is the right term. There is a cabal here that believes it's been predetermined a G5 team cannot make the playoff. I don't believe that. I've got strong feelings on this. By no means am I in the wave the G5 flag category, but I understand reality, and my wants and wishes don't always match up. But I'm telling you, if Cincinnati goes undefeated, Cincinnati's making the college football playoff. History is not the best indicator here. History has led to this. You have to have had a few UCF 2017s in order to get to the point where a G5 team is capable of being a preseason top 10, which matters, very much matters. So not only do they have the preseason esteem instead of coming out of nowhere and being on the radar too late, they've got, as you said, the two legitimate ranked Power 5 road teams. And if they were to beat both of them and they win their conference, they're winning a conference that many people view as more legitimate than the Pac-12 at this point. And so how in the world are we looking at that and saying, oh, they'll be left out? You don't have any, it's not logical. It's just you kind of say it because you want to say it. But I would bet anyone who wants to bet me, if that team's undefeated, that team's in the playoff.
Folks, if you're rooting for chaos and you don't want to have to wait until championship Saturday and you want to see it unfold throughout the season, root for Cincinnati, and then, of course, root for Indiana and Notre Dame to turn around and have excellent seasons in the 10-2 range, something like that. Josh, the people that watch my channel get to hear me rant and rave every day. This has been very refreshing, I'm sure, for most of them to hear from you. Josh, thank you so much for your time and breaking down the college football season again. Josh Pate, Late Kick on 247 Sports. Thank you so much, Josh.
I appreciate you having me on.
All right, folks, Josh Pate, it was great to hear from him. Tremendous analysis of college football across the board to get us set for 2021. I did want to grab a couple comments in the live chat. Then I've got to move on to a meeting myself. We will have Phil Steele here at 1 Eastern as well. And saw a lot of interesting comments in the live chat. I've possibly missed some of them. But again, Mr. TW, I want to catch up with your super chat contribution as well as King Vegeta. Thank you so much for those. Anything here? I thought we saw 12-team playoff dead for sure. So Bruce, I believe, and the other comment that was brought in by Chief Brady, I don't believe that the 12-team playoff is necessarily dead. I believe it's going to be put on hold. I think that if you read between the lines of what was stated by the conference commissioners the other day, I think what they are reviewing what is going to be best for them in how they proceed with this so-called alliance, which may be just a stall tactic to figure out how they can better position themselves within the college football playoff and whether this 12-team route is going to be beneficial for them. Appreciate everybody chiming in, James in particular, to say hit that like button. Josh had made a comment about TCU. I've got the Horned Frogs at 9-3 as possibly being a factor in the Big 12. And the other aspect of that, I think, is that we're going to see a Gary Patterson defense that's going to bring us back to 2013, 14, 15 in that range, with just waves of defensive linemen, defensive end, edge rushers that can wreak havoc. And so look out for TCU. I'm totally on board with Josh on that one. We really didn't get into the playoff situation. I wanted to give him his time and get to a lot of topics concerning 2021. But of course, I am for the playoff expansion, but not to 12 teams because no buys. If you've heard me explain my take on the college football playoff proposal, no buys. So you've probably heard me explain why, and we will do that again at a later point if you've not heard my rant on why buys do not make sense and do not work. All right, Dennis, appreciate you being here. Believes that the playoff proposal is dead. Oh, well, we need to consider, Dennis, that the 12-team playoff proposal might have been originally a setup for an 8-team destination. So consider that as well. 1 p.m. Eastern time with Phil Steele coming up here in 1 hour. So join us then. Got a meeting and a few other things to tend to before that, but 1 p.m. Eastern time right here live with Phil Steele. So catch us then. Appreciate all of you being here. See you next time. Phil Steele, 1 p.m. Eastern time.